Good afternoon, everyone. Most people have multi-vendor security solutions. Getting solutions from two different vendors to communicate can be a challenge, but today we're diving into how you can integrate two of the most popular ones, Palo Alto Firewalls and Cisco ISE. Today we'll go over how our security lead created an API integration to take reporting from Palo Alto Firewalls and automatically quarantine flagged IP addresses. We'll have a roundtable discussion with one of our clients, Rafael Jaime from California Coast Credit Union, and some poll questions sprinkled in the mix. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box on the right-hand side of the window. We'll have a few pauses during our presentation to take questions, and we don't want to miss anything important to you. Before we get too deep, though, you're probably asking yourself, just who is Crossconnect? We're a group of IT infrastructure experts. We're a professional services organization that's well known for diving into unfamiliar situations and driving immediate results. Our team consists of former Cisco Advanced Services and large enterprise engineers that are all primarily Palo Alto PCNSE and Cisco CCIEs. Here's who you'll be hearing from today. We have myself, I'm the CEO and CCIE, and we have Mark DeLong, who's our security lead. He's CCIE, ACCP, CISSP, and PCNSE. And his specialties are route switch and firewalls, of course, ISE guru, and firewall migration aficionado, and he's the brains behind our demo. And you'll also be hearing from Rafael Jaime, the Director of IT at California Coast Credit Union, who's one of our clients and brings credibility to the level of work that Crossconnect can provide. Before we go into the presentation, we're going to go ahead and give a quick poll.
Hi, Maureen. Do you have the poll coming up? It looks like Thomas says that he can't see the poll.
There it is.
Oh, apparently I was on mute. My apologies. If you have run into any situations in network security where you would have liked to utilize an automated solution, if you will, please select yes or no. And then for our third polling question, have you adopted Ansible or other automated orchestration solutions? Or are you interested in adopting these in the future? And again, the answers are simply yes or no. Okay. The fourth question is, do you currently use any custom applications or scripts in your network security or network environment? Thank you for answering that question. And the final question in this set is, do you feel that human response to security events can be too slow and inefficient? And again, this is simply a yes or no question. Thank you so much. All right, we are ready to continue on. Thanks, guys. Sorry I was late with that and muted.
Thank you for taking the time to answer. Now let's take things over to Mark for our presentation and demo of this new tool. And remember, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box for us. Over to Mark.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. So once again, my name is Mark DeLong. I'm the security lead at Crossconnect Engineering. I'm a CCIE and a PCNSE, so I've been working with Cisco for quite a long time and Palo Alto. And what we've seen is we have great solutions by both vendors. Palo Alto has really taken a lead, I would say, in firewalling in the middle and large enterprise from Cisco recently. So there's a lot of mixed environments now with Palo Alto firewalls and Cisco infrastructure, especially Cisco ISE. And with that said, a big question comes to how do you integrate these solutions together, because they do great things on their own, but we would like them to be able to work together. Oftentimes, when reacting to an issue, we see that a great security control like Palo Alto and some of its features like DNS security can block something from happening, but it might take days, weeks, or in the worst case scenario, never for us to find out about that action taking place, because especially in the medium enterprise, our logging and our ability to react to that logging may be lacking. And that's where we can come into using APIs to integrate products like Palo Alto and Cisco ISE to give us a much faster reaction to security events. So there's no native integration between Cisco ISE and Palo Alto firewalls, but what we found is with some programmatic skill sets, we can make them work together, and that's what we'll be talking about today. First, I want to talk about Palo Alto DNS security. There's a lot of great security controls in Palo Alto firewalls, and today we're just going to use DNS security as our example. So I want to bring you up to speed on DNS security before I talk about how we'll integrate it into Cisco ISE. DNS security is going to detect malware, command and control, and other malicious connections at the DNS layer. The firewall is going to look at DNS requests going through it, and when it finds a DNS request for a DNS name that it knows is going to a malicious website, it's going to sinkhole that traffic. And that means intercepting the DNS request and responding back to the DNS server with a sinkhole IP address, which is just an IP address that we're going to be blocking traffic on. It also can log that traffic, obviously, and it does have ability to do some local quarantine in the Palo Alto, but what that's going to do is just prevent the compromised host from reaching out to the internet through the firewall. Typically, it's not going to prevent east-west communication, and so we're going to see that east-west spread of worms and other malicious software is still going to be a threat in that situation. And because of that, this leaves us in a great place to integrate the Palo Alto into Cisco ISE. So when the firewall does sinkhole that malicious traffic, what we'd like it to do in a perfect world scenario is talk to the Cisco ISE server and say, hey, could you quarantine that host so it can't talk east-west to other hosts, other servers that are below the perimeter firewall. Now, there is no built-in ability, so we're going to use a API integration to make this happen. And in our example, we're going to be using, obviously, the DNS sinkhole ability in the Palo Alto firewall. In the Cisco ISE, we're going to use adaptive network control, which is the ability to quarantine hosts either through an API or PX grid. And then in the middle, we're going to use an Ubuntu Linux host running our syslog, which is the open source version of syslog, as a middleman. And when it receives, the sinkhole logs from the Palo Alto firewall, it's going to trigger some Python scripts that are going to provide our API integration into Cisco ISE to quarantine that host. And just going through, I want to showcase some of this. We'll show it in the demo as well. But in the firewall, we're going to have a DNS sinkhole rule at the bottom. You can see we have a DNS sinkhole rule, and there's going to be more rules below that. This is just the rule that's going to block, traffic that we've sinkholed. And then we're going to deny that traffic and send it to our API, our syslog log forwarding profile, which sends it over to our syslog server. And then once again, just to showcase a little bit, at the top here, you can see what the log looks like in our syslog. And circled there, it says DNS sinkhole. That's the same name as this rule here. And we're triggering on the name of the rule in the traffic log. And then at the bottom, we have some rsyslog configuration that's going to match that message and then launch some Python scripts for us to work or to integrate into ISE. And we'll show that in the demo as well. And here's a little bit about our first Python script, and we'll go over this in the demo, but basically we're regexing the source IP address out of the traffic message, and then we're taking that and sending it to a second script that is going to talk to Cisco ISE and quarantine that host. And then finally, this is a little bit, we'll go in more in depth in the demo, but this is a little bit from the ANC script that is going to talk to ISE and do the adaptive network control. And you can see we're building a JSON body at the top there with the ANC policy name and the IP address of the compromised host. And the bottom, we just are looking for an HTTP status 204 back from our REST call to decide whether that host has been quarantined and returning that so it can go into our log. And finally, what it's going to look like in ISE is we're going to, if we went into operations, adaptive network control, endpoint assignment, we'll see that we have a new MAC address. We can give it an IP address, but all quarantines are done by MAC. So it's going to convert that to a MAC based on Cisco ISE's session table. And you can see there's the MAC, there's our policy name that we're assigning, and it says it's quarantine. And we also have, we'll show you more in the demo about how we have a policy, an exception policy in the policy set that matches that quarantine policy and is going to deliver some downloadable ACLs to block all traffic to the host. All right, finally, you obviously want to log in our demo, we're logging, but you'd also want to send an email response to your help desk or your security team to say, hey, we've done an automatic adaptive network control to block, to quarantine this host because we saw, indicator of compromise from the Palo Alto firewall, something, so they'll start working on this. There's other, things we can do like redirection to guest portals that tell the user, hey, you've been quarantined, call the help desk, and we'll talk more about that in the demo. All right, so let me get out of my PowerPoint here and reduce my screens so we can show off the demo. Jeff, is my screen coming through good?
It sure is.
Awesome, cool. So to start here, we have our host up here that's going to be our bad guy that we're quarantining on the inside of our network. And then we have the bottom left here is the switch port that host is coming in on. And on the top right, we have our Ubuntu, our syslog server. And the top right, we're tailing the log for the firewall itself, the syslog for the firewall. And at the bottom right, we're tailing the log for our application. That's going to tell us when something's been quarantined. Further, let's go over here to the ISE server, and you can see right now that under operations, adaptive network control, endpoint assignment, currently nobody is quarantined. If we go to the policy list, we can see we have one quarantine policy in ANC, and that's called Palo Alto _ ANC. Action is quarantine. And also, if we go into our policy sets, and in this case, it's going to be a wired policy. So we will go into our wired policy set. And if we look at global exceptions, so it's actually in all policy sets, but this is the one it's going to be, the host is going to authenticate through. We can see that we have a rule name called quarantine, and it says session has ANC policy equals Palo Alto underscore ANC, and it's got an authorization profile called quarantine. And what we're doing specifically with this authorization profile is we're sending 2 downloadable ACLs, one for IPv4, one for IPv6 that block all traffic. Other things we could do, once again, we could redirect the, we could block everything but HTTPS and then redirect all HTTPS to a guest portal that just says, hey, you've been quarantined because of malicious activity. Please call your help desk. Here's the number for the help desk. So there's other things we could do with ISE. All right, so with that said, let's go back to our endpoint assignment, and then let's check out our firewall. In our firewall policies, this is a really simple setup, and it's not going to look what a data center firewall is going to look like, or even most perimeter firewalls for a medium branch. This is just for simplicity. We have an internet access rule down here that allows traffic to the internet. And this is what our web traffic and our DNS is going to go through. And then we have our anti-spyware policy called sinkhole applied. And if we take a look at that guy, we can see that on our DNS policies, we have certain DNS policies selected for sinkhole. The default Palo Alto DNS, which is the classic sinkhole file that the firewall downloads. And that's been around since before DNS security feature was around, and that's sinkholing. And then we have the newer DNS security, which are dynamic cloud requests where it's not in this file that we download. So we're gonna, ask Palo Alto over the cloud, hey, is this a good DNS name? Is it a bad one? And you can see we're sinkholing command and control, and then we're sinkholing malware domains. And what that means, once again, is when we see that DNS request go through, we send it to, or we intercept it and we send this IP back. And the reason we do that is who's probably making the DNS request through the firewall? It's most likely not the malicious or the compromised host. It's probably our DNS server, right? So we don't want to block traffic from our DNS server and take our network down. So instead, we respond back with a sinkhole IP. Then the DNS server sends that back to the compromised host, and then we can block the compromised host because he's going to start sending traffic to this IP. All right, so let's go back to our policies, and that's where it comes into our sinkhole rule. So the DNS server has responded back to the compromised host, and the compromised host believes 1.1.1.1, that's the IP address I need to go to for, my command and control server for my malware. Now, obviously 1.1.1.1 used to be a big lab IP and other things, and nowadays it's a production IP, so we would not actually use that. We'd probably use, RFC 19 or the RFC for documentation IP addresses like 192.0.2, something like that. Or Palo Alto offers its own sinkhole IP that you're free to use. So we would use a different IP, so don't worry about that. But what we're going to do with this guy is we're going to block the traffic in here, and we're going to send a traffic log to our syslog. And that's where the magic happens. So let's watch it happen, and then I'll go through our scripts and what's happening on our syslog server. So if we go over here to our Ubuntu host, this is our compromised host, and we're just going to simulate him talking to the command and control server by sending one ping out to the sinkhole IP. And so we'll send that. And in a little bit here, we should see some logs show up. And so here we see the PA firewall log, and we can see that because it has the name of the firewall right there. We can see it's a traffic log, which means it was a log profile associated with a security rule. We can see that it's a drop, And then we can see its source IP. Here, let me move this out of the way. We can see its source IP right here. And then we can see that the rule name was DNS sinkhole. And that is what we're regexing on in our rsyslog's configuration to start our script. Down here in our script log, we can see device 10.201.201.21 was quarantined in ISE. And if we look over here at our switch port for this guy, we can see, yep, that's 10.201.201.21. But it says off-C success. Well, that's the old one, right? So we need to check it out again. And now we can see it's still off-C success because we want to be able to control this port. So we still have to say it authenticated successfully. So we can send some attributes down to it. And what we're sending down to it in this case is an ACL that denies all IPv4 traffic and an ACL that denies all IPv6 traffic. And so now in a matter of seconds, we have taken a host that has been blocked by a security control on our firewall for malicious activity, and now we have effectively mitigated any more risk. And so we can start on the investigation process for this host, cleaning it, re-imaging it, getting it back into the production network, and resolving the security incident. And this right here, the reason we're looking at automation to do this and to do much more in our security environments these days is because the classic problem in security is not that we don't see when something goes wrong, it's that we see it when it's too late. Oftentimes, it's 30 days, 60 days out before we recognize, that something went wrong because we have such a huge amount of logs to deal with that it's really hard to sift through it and find the false positives versus the actual security events we need to worry about. And that's where automation can come in and strengthen the security controls we already have to integrate them with the rest of our security infrastructure. That said, let's go to our ISE, and we can see in Cisco ISE, if we refresh here, we can see our MAC that ends in 21.7F. And on our switch, we can see, yep, that was that guy. He ends in 21.7F there too. And we can see that he's been, given the quarantine. If we go to our live logs and take a look at his session, looks like this is his last session right here, or these two, and you can see that he's hitting our exception policy called quarantine. His authorization profile is quarantine. And, say this was a false positive, he calls, we check out the host, we could quickly go into endpoint assignment and just remove him. And that's when you do adaptive network control, either applying it or removing it, it's always going to do a COA immediately, a change of authorization to the switch or wireless controller involved. So it's going to re-authenticate that host, and they are going to get back on right away when you take them off, or get, so we can see he's back authorized successfully and no downloadable ACLs anymore, or when you go on. So it's a really quick process, and that's always good. We can also do other things. We could make a rule with a second kind of fake IP that's not in use in the network, and we could have the help desk person go down the machine. Once they cleaned it, they could ping from that machine to that rule, and we could have a second script that would automatically remove the quarantine. And that way, that would be an easy fix that the help desk could do, is just ping a second IP and it takes them out of quarantine. And we would just make sure that our ACLs that we're deploying allow that ping traffic while blocking everything else, right? We can also, email or, we could also make just a desktop script that the help desk could use, or the security team that could use, where they would just put the IP of the host in that's been quarantined, click a button, and it unquarantines. Obviously, if the people dealing with this are, wrong web browser. If the people dealing with this are familiar with ISE, they can go in here, but there's ways we can get around that. You know, a lot of times we don't want all our help desk personnel in Cisco ISE because we're worried they might break something. So there's different ways we can go around that. Lastly, I'd like to show you what this looks like, you know, at the programmatic level. So let me go in here and show you the scripts and show you what's happening. So let me widen this guy up. And let's see here. First, let's just take a look at what's going on in the syslog configuration. It's not too difficult, but it's quite interesting how we're getting syslog to call a script. Let's see here. It's going to be rsyslog.conf. And so if we look in here, this is our rsyslog.conf file, and this is what configures our rsyslog server. But we have a little section here that's non-standard. And the first thing we're doing is we're loading what's called the onprog module, which is a rsyslog module that lets you call scripts. And then we're making a template just to normalize what our syslog messages that we're going to send to the script are going to look like. And then we're just going to say if the message contains DNS sinkhole, then you've got an action. Now it's very kind of C-like here and there. And then our action is, you know, an onprog action, that module once again, and we're going to call this script. So let's take a look at that script. So that's called IP Finder. And we have two scripts in this solution. The first one is basically going to be used to take the IP address out of that traffic log that it's getting sent and send that to a script that's going to talk to Cisco ISE. And it's also going to prep that Cisco ISE script with some information on how to talk to Cisco ISE, specifically the IP address of Cisco ISE, its username, its password. You know, obviously this is a lab ISE, so I don't care that its password's right there. Palo Alto _ANC, this is our ANC policy. So it's got some information to send to the function that we're calling that actually talks to ISE. And so the other thing it's going to do is we're going to do a regex, and this is just a simple regex that looks for an IP address. There's more exacting regexes. This one could be, you know, could catch on some things that aren't IP addresses, but we know what our input is, so we can just use a simple regex. And so we're taking standard in, which is going to be, you know, our syslog, when it calls this, is going to send the syslog message to the script as standard in. And we're doing a pattern search for this compiled regex. And then when our first pattern found, which is called pattern 0, is going to be the first IP in the message. And the first IP we know in a traffic log is the source IP of the host that sent the traffic that hit the rule. So we know that's what we want. And then we're going to call our module, which we've imported, and that's basically just our file that has the script that talks to ISE in it, and then the function name. And we're going to send it all that information we talked about, including the IP address of the host that we grabbed from regex and the ANC policy name. And so let's close this guy and then look at our ANC policy. So this is quite a bit longer, and I don't expect everyone to follow this super well. But just to give a brief overview, Cisco ISE has a REST-based API. So we're going to be talking over HTTP. It runs over port 9060, and it's a RESTful API. So we're going to be talking to it in that fashion with the REST client. And we're going to be using JSON formatting, which is typically the easiest to deal with REST APIs. And so we just have some basic things, setting up an HTTP connection, embedding our credentials in it as a header, and then giving it some headers that say, hey, I take JSON back, I'm going to send you JSON, and here's my header where my credentials are, and then we're going to start building a JSON body. And the important things in here is we're going to send it a policy name, which is our ANC policy name, and we're going to send an IP address, which is the IP address we want to quarantine. And we're going to give that guy an execute, send it, and then we have a little bit of error correction. But the main thing here is with our response, we're going to take that in and we're going to check its status code. What we're looking for in this one is an HTTP status code of 204. And if we have that, the device has been quarantined in ISE. That's what this API module gives back if you quarantine the host correctly. And we have a little bit of error correction that gives returns errors back to our other script if it didn't work right. But if it did, we're going to return device quarantined in ISE, and the other script is going to write that to the log. At that point, we could also send that as an email, right? The initiating script could send that as an email to your help desk. We can do a lot of other things with it as well. That said, let me get out of this guy and bring my PowerPoint back up. With all that said, that concludes our Cisco ISE demo. And we'd like to stop for any questions and Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please enter those into the chat bar, and we will answer, or I will answer those to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give this a few minutes. Mark, as of right now, I don't see any particular questions. So if you'd like to go ahead and move on, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, we can just answer questions, later on it if they come up. That sounds fine. With that, that concludes the demo, and I'd like to pass over to Jeff. I believe Jeff has a quick poll to give, and then we're going to continue on with the presentation. Jeff, could you take it from here, please?
Yes, thank you, Mark. This is just one example of the custom outside-the-box solutions we've been able to cook up in-house. I'll just take a brief pause to go over a few more poll questions.
Okay, let me launch the first of these poll questions. The first one here is, do you think that networks and network security will become more software-driven or less software-driven in the future? This is a simple yes, more or less answer. If you'll just click which one works for you, that would be great. We'll give it a second here. All right, we have 100% of the people who have voted. Let's go ahead and do our next poll. Sorry about that, guys. I'm struggling here. So the next poll question is, do you feel your organization has networking and networking security tasks that could be more efficient by utilizing automation? If you'll just answer that one as a yes or a no. Thank you so much. We are 100% voted on that one. The third question that I have is, could security events be mitigated faster and leave less exposure to your organization with an automated security solutions? Again, just a yes or no answer here. All right. Thanks very much for answering that one. The next question is, are you interested in automated quarantining of compromised hosts on your network? Just a simple yes or no here as well. Okay, thank you so much. And I believe that's it. Those are all the questions that we have. Thank you so very much.
All right.
100% of people answered yes on that one. There we go.
Thank you for taking that. Now that you've seen a sample of what we can do, I'd like to share a little more about Crossconnect. We focus on services and solutions first. Our customers see our engagements as help to their team. Whiteboarding, design, deployments, not as sales conversations. When you bring our team on for any engagement, we integrate seamlessly into your operation to drive immediate results. We also have the ability to function as a value-added reseller for you. At the Palo Alto Innovator level and Cisco Gold Partner, we're well-versed in both ecosystems and even making them work well together. We've installed every product we sell, so we know all the industry best practices. So you're getting the full package with Crossconnect. And you don't just have to take our word for it. Listen to one of our clients, Rafael Jaime, who is the IT director of California Coast Credit Union, a client we have an ongoing managed services partnership with. We've worked with Raf at numerous companies across multiple engagements. He and Mark are going to have a roundtable discussion about how having a strong managed services partner can make all the difference for your enterprise, along with how we built a strong relationship. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me get my webcam back up. All right. So once again, my name is Mark DeLong. I'm the Security Services Team Lead for Crossconnect Engineering. I'd like to introduce Rafael Jaime. Raf is the Director of IT Infrastructure for California Coast Credit Union. He's been with California Coast for 2 years. When he first started, he brought Crossconnect Engineering to assist their team. Raf, can you talk a little bit about bringing us in to assist?
Sure, thank you for having me. I had worked with Crossconnect at 2 of my last positions with great results. So it was a natural thing for me to bring them in as part of our team. That said, we did end up bringing you guys in sooner than we originally thought. Shortly after introducing the Crossconnect team to our CIO, we had a major outage and required your help immediately. While we were making a major data center change, all of our VPNs went down. Obviously, this left us in a major pinch with our ATMs and branch sites all down and unable to service the members. Fortunately, your team was able to assist and quickly resolve that issue.
Yeah, I remember that. You guys reached out to Jeff. Jeff got with me. I think I was kind of working on something else, but eventually we had one of my junior engineers work with you for a bit, and then eventually after like 30 minutes, I came on, and I think we got you back up in a couple hours. So that was a stressful time.
Yes, and we very much appreciated that. That definitely could have been a much worse situation than it was if your team didn't react and resolve the issue as fast as you guys did.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. We've done since then. We've done several projects. Could you talk about one of those and give the audience an idea of the kind of work we've done for California Coast?
Sure. I think the biggest project so far and the most important one for us was migrating our firewalls at our 2 main data centers and our 2 test sites from Juniper Screen OS firewalls to the modern Palo Alto firewalls.
So, I'm sorry, I just got a message. I apologize. So, Raf, those were definitely very important projects. Can you talk about what your experience with our team was on that project?
Sure, it was great. Going into such a major migration can be quite scary for both my engineering team involved and the management and executive teams.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, we started with the secondary data center, and from the start, it was obvious how much expertise Crossconnect's teams had at migrating data center firewalls. This was not a slapdash operation, as our Junipers had been in production for 11 years and had accumulated a ton of rules that were not used anymore.
Quite a bit old firewalls.
Yeah, very old firewalls, but you know, we got our money's worth out of them, I guess, after 11 years.
Yeah.
Crossconnect ran a project with upfront planning and integration with our engineers to ensure all the behavior in our present firewalls were migrated into our new firewalls as much as possible. As you all mentioned in the planning, not everything comes across cleanly when migrating across vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we had an alternate plan for those features used in our old firewall that were different in the new firewalls. Furthermore, you worked with us to ensure that we had the right acceptance testing in place and a clear plan for troubleshooting issues and rollback if it came to that, though it never did. Your team migrated our 2 major data centers and our 2 test sites with no major issues.
Awesome. Thanks, Raf. That was definitely an important project for us and for you guys, especially with that being our first major engagement in California coast. That said, you brought up a great point that behavior between different vendor firewalls often is quite different, and there's a lot involved in making sure you match previous behavior to the new firewalls to make sure that it works correctly. Is there another project that you can think of that you could talk to our audience about that we worked on with you?
Yeah, the security profile optimization project comes to mind. Our team was very wary of turning on the Palo Alto security services straight away, but we wanted them in place ASAP, so we did not have to renew our service contracts for the devices they would replace. That saves us a little bit of money and gets us ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
We already had another IPS service, and although we wanted Palo Alto threat prevention, the antivirus, anti-spyware, and geo-blocking, we were very worried about blocking legitimate traffic when turning on these services. We definitely did not want to impact any of our members.
That's awesome, Raf. Obviously, we don't want to worry about we are very worried about what's going to happen when we're going to introduce new features. Can you talk about how we introduced those features with you and alleviated your fears about making them work correctly?
Yeah, you guys actually enabled the services in alert-only mode when we were doing migration. And after that, your team analyzed 30 days worth of logs and then took our engineers through the blocks that would have occurred and made recommendations on what the most important blocks to look at were. And there were quite a few things that you guys had to comb through to get to where we were. And together, we did indeed find some false positives that would have blocked legitimate traffic. Most of the blocks were correct, but some of the blocks could definitely have caused outages. You and your engineers worked together to tune the security service settings in Palo Alto firewalls so that the legitimate traffic wouldn't be affected. In the end, we got the geo-blocking that our security VP desperately wanted. We also got the Palo Alto IPS, AS, and AV services that we were interested in, but with no outages to the legitimate traffic. We had 0 problems after that.
Awesome. And I remember how much your VP and your security officer or security manager really wanted that geo-blocking. That was very important to get in place. But once again, just like the IPS, just like the antivirus, when we put a new service in place, we're always worried about false positive. It's great when it blocks the stuff we need it to block, and it can be disastrous when it blocks things that we're not expecting it to block.
Yeah,
so that was definitely a great example of us working together, and thank you for that, Raf. That said, you've brought us into your last 3 positions with 3 separate companies over your career. The last 3 you've brought in Crossconnect Engineering. Could you briefly tell our audience about why you keep turning back to us and bringing us in?
Well, from day one, Crossconnect has shown their expertise and ability to work under pressure. And I, unfortunately, have tested those abilities multiple times.
Yes, you have.
Especially when starting a new environment. Crossconnect has always provided exceptional and expert services and projects. And, I, like many of my colleagues in medium enterprises, have been disappointed by the services provided by many of the large IT partner companies out there. With those large IT partners, you will get the expert engineers on the phone when you are buying the equipment or the licenses, But when you utilize these same partners for service projects, you often get much less experienced engineers working on these projects. That has never been the case with Crossconnect. All the engineers that I have worked with for service projects and managed services have always had a high level of expertise. It's like what you guys said in the intro, Crossconnect is truly a services and solutions-led company. Product sales have always been an afterthought for you guys. Your main priority, in my experience, has always been to deliver to us a solution that works. And so far, you haven't disappointed.
Thank you, Raf. We really appreciate your confidence in us. That was a great Q&A, and I really appreciate you giving us those examples and sharing with our audience what Crossconnect brings to the table. That said, I'm sorry, go ahead, Raf, I apologize.
I was just gonna say, I definitely want to thank you guys, because there have been a number of times when you have really stepped in, not knowing anything about the environment, and got right to work and came up with solutions. And, you know, for that, I'm very grateful, because not only did, you know, you help the company, but, you know, you made me look good with the partnership. So that's what's important.
That's what we're here for, Raf, making you look good. You know, that is one of the things we do, or strive to do. But thank you, Raf. I really appreciate your vote of confidence. With that said, we'd briefly like to take any questions once again. If anyone has any questions for Raf, for myself that we could answer at this point, please put them in the chat. If we don't see much, we'll just move on and answer any questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions yet. That's fine. With that said, I'm going to pass it back to Jeff for him to continue the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for your time and listening to me and Raf, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark and Raf. As you can see when partnering with us, your team can utilize our knowledge and expertise through a variety of offered service agreements. When you partner with Crossconnect, you get a partner that sets itself apart in such ways as having all senior engineers, CCIE and PCNSE led from the top down, including myself, very deep services expertise in IT infrastructure, specifically network security. We straddle both Palo Alto and Cisco infrastructure and integrate well between the two. We have a deep automation practice. We also have a responsive, white glove, and personalized experience. We answer any call quickly and email quickly. We seek to meet all requirements of our customers. We also give a consistent experience with low turnover. You work with the same team every time. With engagements that have ranged from 1 hour to over 1,000 hours, no job is too big or too small for Crossconnect. I look forward to having a more personal conversation with you all about the service, expertise, and experience we can bring to your enterprise. This time, I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar on integrating Palo Alto firewalls with Cisco ISE APIs. We'll have a brief survey come out after the webinar, and I greatly appreciate you all taking the time to fill it out. Thanks again for attending, and have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. I just want to give everybody one last chance to ask any questions that you might have. And otherwise, we are done for the day. Nope, I'm not seeing anything show up. Thank you, team, for doing this. We highly appreciate everybody's time and for being with us today. Thank you again.